to be hosting Kathryn Lane's book launch for her new book out from Alamo Bay Press, and to welcome back returning guest Lowell McWhite. We're going to start the afternoon off with Kathryn. Award-winning author Kathryn Lane writes fiction inspired by Latin American culture she experienced during her career as an international finance executive and in her life growing up in Mexico. Her debut novel, Waking Up in Medellin, thank you, was recognized with the Killer Nashville Silver Falchion for Best Fiction Book of the year 2017 and a second Silver Falchion for Best Fiction Adult Suspense 2017. Her novel also received a Pinnacle Achievement Award in fiction. She is a 2017 finalist for the RONE Award in the mystery category. In 2017, the novel was also released in Spanish under the title Despertando en Medellín. Association of Writers and Writing Programs featured Kathryn on the Arriba Baseball panel in Seattle 2014. She has been recognized in her community with a Montie Award for Excellence in the Arts, and as a member of the Rotary Club, she has been twice honored with the Paul Harris Award. She lives in Texas with her husband, Bob Hurt, where she serves on the Montgomery County Literary Arts Council. Please welcome Kathryn.
I'll give you a copy of the book. Let me tell you, there aren't many people, if you look on Amazon, that has a book cover that the art is done by Austin artist Reggie Thomas. Thank you all for coming out this afternoon. If you're here to hear Kathryn Lane, the author that writes steamy sex stories about Arabian princesses, let me tell you that I'm going to disappoint you, because I am not that Kathryn Lane. But a few people have bought her book thinking it's me, and they've said, good grief, yeah, we had no idea you wrote such steamy sex scenes. Someday, maybe I'll read one of hers, but it's not high on my priority list right now. I want to give you a little background on myself, and then we'll get into an actual reading. I'm originally from northern Mexico, from Casas Grandes, Chihuahua, and the first time I started painting in oils was when I was 6 years old, so I thought that I was going to be an oil painter all my life. Well, life interfered, and I left Mexico and moved to the United States in my early 20s, and I tried to make a living out of art. And we have a guest back here, Max, whose mother is a wonderful artist, and she does make a living out of it. So I was a starving artist, and I didn't like that lifestyle. I didn't like it at all. So I decided I would go back to the university, and I went to UNM, and we have a UNM grad that's here too. And I studied accounting and finance and economics. And then I went to work for a CPA firm, and I became a CPA. And that first tax season, when I had gone from making, this is a few years ago, $3,000 as an artist to $20,000 as a CPA doing taxes, I was so thrilled. And I thought, this is wonderful, I'm doing taxes, this is great. The second tax season rolled around, and I thought, what was it I liked about doing taxes last year? The third tax season rolled around, and I said, I'm out of here before I slit my wrists. I'm so bored with this. And that's when I joined Johnson & Johnson, and I worked in international finance, and they sent me around the world. I went to 72 countries with them over a 20-year period. And then it was time to take an early retirement because I wanted to get back into the arts. And I thought I would go back into painting. But when I was faced with that decision after retiring, after that early retirement, I thought, I don't have very much to paint about. I had lots to write about after being in 72 countries. So that's how I made the switch. I enrolled at the Lone Star College and took a creative writing course, and that's where I came across my mentor and my publisher. He is Alamo Bay Press, and they are the ones that publish these short stories. And Pamela Booten, where are you, Pamela? Back there. Thank you. Pamela is a consultant with Alamo Bay Press, and of course also a good friend. So I've been asked a lot of times, how does someone go from a career in finance in corporate America to creative writing? Well, the answer is real easy. John Grisham went from being an attorney to writing about lawyers. So what I did for my first full-length novel was to take that background that I knew of international finance, and that was the background for my first full-length novel. Short stories are my love, though, and short stories don't come out of finance or accounting or they come out of the subconscious mind. They are ideas that have just bubbled up through that thin veil between the unconscious and the conscious mind. And sometimes in the middle of the night, I will actually wake up and write something down. And one of those stories is in Backyard Volcano, and it's behind the murals. And it's one of the short stories included in there. That comes directly from a dream. And you want to read it to find out what it's about. And then, of course, my subconscious mind, and Bob will tell you that it's pretty crazy, also has that influence of having grown up in Mexico and not only reading authors, but also hearing stories as I was growing up that had very much to do with sort of a surreal background. And my feeling always was that I was looking at life through a prism rather than just reality straight on, because life in Mexico, as in all Latin American countries, could be very difficult for a lot of people. And I think that it was out of that people told stories that had surreal elements. In fact, Gabriel Garcia Marquez from Colombia, who grew up in Aracataca, Colombia, his grandmother, who raised him, would tell him stories that had a lot of surreal elements. And I'm sure that, and he claimed when he was alive that that's where some of his ideas for surrealism came out of. And he is, of course, an author that I've always loved. Backyard Volcano started life as a poem about a 15-year-old girl, a quinceañera, that was about to celebrate her birthday when the Paricutin volcano goes off. It just explodes in a cornfield. Well, the poem, I don't know if the poem was very good or not. I actually tried to find it to see if I could, go back and read it and see what I had in it. But authors quite often have conversations in their heads with characters, and the character in that poem, the 15-year-old, kept saying to me, there's more to this story, there's more to this story. So at that point, it became a short story. And what I did was I changed the whole premise of it because the volcano had erupted in 1943, and I wanted a short story that was a little more contemporary than that. And I then had her become the grandmother of the person who tells the story, Patricia, the granddaughter. And so I finished the short story, and then the new character, Patricia, says, oh, but it doesn't end there. You've got to write a little more. Now, Mick is kind of looking at me very strangely, but let me say that there was one time when I first started writing that I listened to an author talk about his conversations about a character that lived 2,000 years ago in Babylonia, and I thought, this man needs to go to the funny farm. Well, when I started having these conversations in my head, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm just the same as that guy. I'll probably see him at the funny farm. It happens all the time, though. And so the anthology has Backyard Volcano, which is the story that I'm going to be talking about, but it's a novella. It's 50,000 words. It takes up half the book. And then there are 7 short stories that take up the rest of the book. And I'm going to be reading a few passages, and then I'm going to skip passages because I want to get you to a certain point in the story. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in those blanks. The grandmother has left her little town in Mexico near the volcano for unknown reasons, and she is now obviously in McAllen, Texas, which is where Patricia was born. Patricia, the granddaughter, lives with her grandmother and her father because the mother disappeared and never heard from her again. And so the grandmother left Mexico, left Angawan, and never returned except to go once a year to Mexico City, not her hometown, but Mexico City, to visit a relative. I will pick up now and read some of it so that you get a flavor for the actual story. Abuela told me incredible stories, like the time she traveled by horseback from the port of Veracruz to the village of Angawan in Michoacan, when her father moved the family to the rich farmlands of that picturesque lake region of Mexico. Then there was the story of how her husband, my grandfather, who died long before I was born, gave up gun smuggling when their son, my father, came bouncing into this world. Abuelo's partners resented him leading the business, so he had to pay them off, and it cost him the fortune he had amassed as a contraband runner. I was enthralled by all of my grandmother's tales, but my favorite story was about Paricutin, the volcano that sprang up just in time to fire off on her 15th birthday. Patricia, she said, you should have seen the lava spewing high in the sky. It started almost on cue as the mariachis began singing Las Mañanitas. Women ran for cover thinking the world was coming to a fiery end, while men gulped down more mezcal and with each blast yelled, "Ole!" as if they were toreadors fighting the volcano. Every time they talked about the volcano, the grandmother, who had brought some rocks from that area of Mexico with her, would pull one out and give it to Patricia, and then they'd go through a naming ceremony. And so one day, the grandmother decides Patricia is old enough to get a very special stone. And she asks Patricia what it is. And Patricia answers, it's a rock. Una piedra volcánica, Abuela said, correcting me. A very important volcanic rock with a crystal embedded in it. I brought 2 suitcases full of these piedras when I left my hometown in Mexico to move here. Volcanic rocks have played a large role in my life, and I've always loved them. Look, Patricia, at the holes left by the pockets of air embedded in the hot lava. Like hieroglyphics, they seem to leave a story written in pockmarks. That particular rock was given the name of Lobo, which means wolf, and it became Patricia's favorite volcanic rock. Over the years, Paricutin became a ritual. Every time Abuela enacted it, a new volcanic rock appeared, each one requiring a naming ceremony. I named a lot of rocks, but Lobo remained my favorite. Every time I added a new rock to my growing collection in a wooden box in my bedroom, I would find rocks strewn around my room in the next morning, sometimes in a pattern. Other times, they would be randomly spread over the hardwood floor, and on rare occasions, the last rock added to the collection had been the only one spat out from the box onto the floor. And even though she always denied arranging the stones in any way, I figured she had to do it. Who else? Paricutin was sheer magic, she explained whenever I questioned her. It seems natural that each one of the stones contains a little magic. That's why I brought so many of them with me when I left Angawan. As I've told you, volcanic rocks have played a role in my life, for good and for evil. When I became a teenager, the grand old lady entertained me with stories about her village and the Purepecha Indian myths. My grandfather came from the local Purepecha culture, a bold contrast to her pure Spanish roots. Abuelo was volatile, she told me, and his moods could change like the eruptions from a volcano one minute to a quiet, introspective man a moment later. But overall, he was a good man, she always insisted. She told me other stories about her life too, like when she'd been invited out on a date a few years after my grandfather died and she was already living in Medellin. My date was a very handsome, charming man I met through mutual friends. He invited me to a wedding of a couple we both knew. I bought a new dress for the occasion and felt young and feminine again. He was driving along in his old Ford, talking and looking at me. Staring at me, actually. He stared so much, in fact, that he hit the car in front of us. And Abuela glanced down at that point and touched the bracelet on her arm. So what happened next? This was a new story I'd never heard before. I figured it was your abuelo's way of telling me I should not remarry. So I never dated again. But Grandpa died when you were very young. Why did abuelo die, I asked. That was a long time ago, mija. When I asked questions she didn't like, she would take her hand to her hair, or she'd fidget with her bracelet, and she would say, your grandfather died a long time ago, mija, too long for my memory. Besides, we don't always understand the mystery of life. Did abuelo give you that bracelet, I asked? No, this was from a very dear friend. When I was 14, I brought a friend home from school to show him my collection of volcanic rocks. His name was Roberto, but at school we called him Turco, or Turk, because of his Middle Eastern looks. I don't think you should have a friendship with this young man, she said as soon as he left. You can bring home anyone you want, but not Turco. I only wanted to show him my rock collection, I said. Anyone but Turco. Do you hear me? The morning of my own quinceañera celebration, Abuela died of a massive heart attack. The neighborhood erupted into a large lava pit of tears. Hundreds of women appeared. Abue had been their best friend, and they arrived weeping at our front door, bringing baskets of tamales and platters full of tostadas, pots of chile con carne, and large pitchers of atole to drink. They spread the plates of food on every surface in the house, the old tables cracking and creaking and swaying under the weight of Tex-Mex gastronomy piled on them. My party was canceled. So, now her grades went down in school. She'd been a straight A student, and she failed a test in science, so her teacher said, you've got to make this up, and I know you're having a tough time, but do a project for class. So, of course, what did she do? A project on the pariputin. And she brought in her rocks to show and, show and tell at school, and passed out the rocks. And then when she finished and collected the rocks, there was one that was missing. And of course, which one was missing? Lobo, her favorite one. And the teacher even asked Turco if maybe he had the rock, which of course he denied and got angry that he was accused of taking a rock. And he started walking Patricia home from school every day. And he did that for 2 months. And then Patricia said, stop, no more. I don't want you walking me home from school anymore. Don't want to have anything to do with you, because she felt guilty about her grandmother not liking him. And he said in anger, okay, but you will be sorry. 12 years go by. She's graduated from college, and she is a research fellow in volcanology with the U.S. Geological Survey, and a project took me to Mexico to study volcanoes with recent eruptions. The Popocatépetl near Mexico City and the Colima in the same state, in the state by the same name, Colima, obviously the volcano, Colima, the state in Mexico. My grandmother's hometown of Angawan was en route between the two volcanoes in the study. Destiny begged me to visit her teenage village and the Paricutin, her backyard volcano. The town of Angawan transported me to another era. Its main cobblestone street meandered through neighborhoods of whitewashed houses clutching the mountainside like bird cages, an architect's nightmare where no two lines were parallel. The homes followed the contour of the terrain, up at one end and down at another, cobblestone stairs either angled up to a doorway or down to the street level to the landings where uneven sidewalks allowed pedestrians to access front doors and homes. And eventually, my taxi rattled its way to the town square. The Central Park, hibiscus flowering around a fairy tale kiosk in the center, displayed the first straight lines in the village. 5 smaller streets like tributaries flowed out from the square, flooding the town in more cobblestones. A stone church with a wedding cake spire stood across the street from the park. My hotel, a fortress-like historic structure, appeared braced for the onslaught of tourists, invading troops, or even worse catastrophes like volcanic eruptions. And so she goes into the hotel. A toothy clerk welcomes her to the volcano area and says that this town is known not only as Angawan but also as the balcony of the Paricutin volcano. And so they talk a little bit, and she says that she's there and explains why she's there, but basically that her grandmother had been born in that town and had been there until she mysteriously moved to Texas. And he asks for the last name, and she gives it to a Bustamante. And he says, oh, there's a family with that last name. So he arranges for a taxi to take her to the volcano and then drop her off at the home of what are her relatives. So Patricia dines with her grandmother's cousin, and after dinner, over tequila, Alicia, that's the cousin, makes a toast. Salud al destino that finally brought me news of my cousin Toña, she said. She set the tequila glass on the table. Cheers to destiny, I said. I lifted my shot glass to salute our common past. I've always wondered about my grandfather. Can you tell me about him? I asked. Alicia picked up her tequila and took a sip and said, what would you like to know? How did he die? Alicia's eyebrows rose ever so slightly. He was killed, she said. Killed? How? I asked, surprise evident in my voice. I shifted in the chair and sat up straighter. It's a sad story, Alicia said. Her fingers held the shot glass in a firm grip. Let's see, where should I start? Well, at the beginning. Your grandparents, Toña and Pepe, wanted a child so badly, and the years passed and Toña never conceived. She took every herb, prayed to San Gerardo, the patron saint of women seeking to get pregnant, took pilgrimages to miraculous chapels, and saw every medical doctor in the area. Still, nothing happened. You have to understand, back then, fertility treatments like today did not exist. She stopped to take another sip of tequila. Was my father adopted? I asked. Oh, no. Toña said that she believed if she prayed enough or visited enough miraculous chapels, she would receive a miracle. She cleaned the church, washed and ironed all the vestments, led novenas for the parishioners, all to no avail. That's about the time a young priest, fresh out of the seminary, Padre Alfonso, arrived in Angawan. he lacked administrative skills and relied heavily on your grandmother to run the parish. Padre Alfonso also asked Doña to teach catechism classes on the weekends. She spent a lot of time in the church. I took a sip of tequila as I listened. 10 years after Doña and Pepe married, a miracle occurred. That's what your grandfather called it, the long-awaited miracle. I guess my grandmother was pregnant. Yes, and the baby changed their lives. Doña was so busy being a mother, she stopped almost all her church activities, except for washing and ironing the vestments, which she delivered to the parish every week, and she always took the baby with her. Are you saying, I stammered? Alicia sighed and looked up at a crucifix on the wall and says, I cannot judge. All I know is the whole town kept the rumors going, almost like episodes out of a soap opera. Shortly after your father's second birthday, the rumors and gossip intensified, and your grandmother became pregnant for the second time. As everyone thought your father looked exactly like the priest, the twisted tongues said the priest and Doña were still having an affair, and that's why she became pregnant again. Alicia lowered her eyes. Alicia, tell me what happened. I took my glass of tequila and finished what was left in the shot glass, nervous to hear such contradictions to the image I had of my beloved abuela. Pepe beat your grandmother so badly she lost the baby. He believed he had become the laughingstock of the town. Alicia took the bottle of tequila and refilled our glasses again. On a Sunday, 2 weeks later, your grandfather confronted Father Alfonso, who was still wearing his freshly starched vestments after Mass, vestments your grandmother would have washed. With parishioners standing around talking to the priest, Pepe pulled out a gun at close range. Padre Alfonso tried to wrestle the gun away from your grandfather. The gun fired. Onlookers expected to see the Padrecito fall to the ground. Instead, it was your grandfather who fell. Alicia reached over and touched my arm as if to console me. And then they talk a little bit more about how that all went, and of course the obvious implication is that the priest is really her biological grandfather. And so Alicia is apologizing and says, I'm sorry, I should have realized you have the right to know what happened to your biological grandfather. He left the church and moved to Mexico City. He taught. Mexico City? Really, Mexico City? It seemed pretty obvious to me that perhaps over the years, Abuela and the priest made contact again, and that was a relative she went to see every year in Mexico City. So Patricia returns to the hotel trying to digest all this information, and she spends the night there and checks out the next morning because she has to go on to the Colima volcano to do her work. And when she checks out, the toothy clerk at the front desk says, you received a package. And she says, a package? From whom? I don't know. It was here when I returned from a short errand a few minutes ago. The package was left on the counter with your name on it, he said. So he handed me the small box. I opened it. A volcanic rock rested on white tissue paper. No card, no name, no identifying data. Who could have done this? I took the stone out. I could not believe what I saw. The outline of a squirrel, the bushy tail rising above his body, a single quartz crystal of an eye looking straight at me. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. It was Lobo. He'd come home. Lobo found me in his own backyard. But how did he get here? I wondered. Who had wrapped him in tissue paper, placed him in a box, and delivered the package to me at the hotel? Who knew I was even here? Maybe Alicia sent it, but I dismissed that idea, since Alicia and I never discussed Paricutin or the volcanic rocks my grandmother had given me. And they had not had contact all those years. I turned Lobo over in my hand, trying to understand who followed me here to return him. I looked around the lobby, but the lobby was empty. That's where the short story ended, and that's where I was going to end the story. And again, the idea was, this isn't the end of the story, we need to keep going. And this, I think, is where the story really begins, because it's the unraveling of all the family secrets that took her grandmother to Texas, and to go without saying, without ever seeing anybody, except for somebody in Mexico City. And I will leave it there so that you can think about whether you want to know the end of the story or not. Let me just say one final thing about ideas bubbling up from the unconscious mind, because I have learned to trust my unconscious mind and those meditative and dreamlike qualities, and because that's where creativity often comes from, and some people call it intuition. Even Einstein wrote, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant." We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. But I would say that writing is about both. You need to have that sacred gift, but you have to have the faithful servant to give you the discipline to make sure you finish the stories that come up through that sacred gift. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody at Malvern Books. Thank you very much for inviting me. I want to thank Nick again, my husband Bob, obviously, Pamela. I want to thank Ken also. Thank you very much for coming out to see me and seeing all of us. And to all of you, thank you very much.